Tawfiq, welcome to the Dean's List.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, you know, it's been a great journey with your book, and we're here to talk about what we lost. And, you know, this captured the attention of Canada, of all Canadians, and national media around the world. You're a former board member. You're currently a lawyer in New York. You were born and educated in Canada. Can you tell me a little bit about your history and how you got involved with the We Charity?
I first got to know the co-founders of We Charity, Mark and Craig Kielburger, when we were actually young. I actually went to high school with Mark Kielburger, but I left to go practice law in New York City starting in 2002, and so I'd been out of Canada. And so I'd followed Free the Children, which is the predecessor of We Charity, from a bit of a distance. I knew that the charity had grown and had become a big international charity focused on international development and youth empowerment, but I didn't really know much about its day-to-day workings. And then in around 2017, the Kielburgers and some other board members asked me if I'd like to join their US board, because I'm a lawyer and a law firm partner and a litigator who specializes in crisis management and risk profile reviews. They sort of thought it would be useful to have someone like me on the board. And so I was on the board through the entire We Charity scandal. And then in the summer of 2021, I decided to step down from the board to write this book after we together decided this was an important story to be told.
Through 2017 and before we got into the COVID situation, which obviously created the opportunity, or what appeared to be an opportunity for We Charity, which turned into clearly a horror story. Maybe you can just talk a little bit about that and some of the great work and through that time while you were on the board.
There's a lot of people who have heard of We Charity and Free the Children, but don't really understand what it does. And I think in some ways that's part of the problem, part of the challenge of why people misunderstood the charity so quickly. There's two really areas where I think We Charity did incredible work around the world. The first was on youth empowerment. And what I was really proud of is we were in 7,000 schools across Canada. And what We Charity did was it put curricula in schools that were focused on service learning and encouraging young people to become change makers and to see themselves as capable of, really through service to others, making a real difference in the world. And it helped not just those students, but also it provided educators with a way in which to allow their students and allow young people to become more active and engaged citizens. And that's one part of the We Charity world, and I was incredibly proud of all the work we're doing. I met thousands of young people who were, galvanized to not just volunteer as young people, but then eventually to, pursue careers in the nonprofit world or to start socially conscious businesses, which would do amazing things and, really had a transformative effect. And then on the other side of the equation, We Charity was an international development organization, which in 9 different countries, particularly in Kenya and India and Ecuador, had all sorts of really interesting sustainable development programs where they would partner with local communities and really create a 5-year model and a 5-pillar model that allowed communities to sort of emerge from poverty and then take control of their own destinies, and We Charity could exit. And so it was a really interesting, innovative model, and I traveled to Kenya to see it firsthand and was really proud of the work we were doing.
Let me focus on a couple points there. One, I want to go back to the social enterprise and entrepreneurs. I know the founders of We Charity actually was involved with helping some of these young entrepreneurs emerge into this whole space. And so just tell me a little bit about that before we talk about Kenya.
I think the Kielburgers always saw themselves as social entrepreneurs at heart, who believed that there was a way to create business that could facilitate positive change. And one of the directions that We Charity was heading in is to try and create incubation space for young people in Canada and elsewhere to create ideas and to come up with ways to facilitate their thinking around business ideas. And that was one of the founding principles behind the We Global Learning Center, which had been built in downtown Toronto and sadly has now been sold as a result of We Charity in Canada having to close. One of the thoughts around that was, let's make a space for young people to come, work on their ideas, brainstorm, give them the tools they need to make sure that Canada was, a leading center of socially, minded business and social entrepreneurial ideas, for the next 25 years. And that was the direction in which I think we was headed, and it was providing a lot of really important support.
I've traveled to Kenya. I've been in the Masai Mara region. I've been with the indigenous people there. I've seen the poverty that they live in. I've seen the lack of education. But what I've also seen is what education has done for young women in the country, and and making them not only a vital part of the community, but leaders within Kenya, Ecuador, India. Can you talk a little bit more about that and just the impact that we've had in those countries?
We Charity got its roots building schools, elementary schools. And then it quickly discovered, well, you can build a lot of elementary schools, but if you don't build local high schools, these kids have nowhere to go. And so it started building entire school systems. And ultimately realized, well, if children want to go to school and you want them to go to school, you can't just erect a building. What you have to do is allow a community to prioritize education by making sure that they have sources of clean water, that you have healthy meals, that you have the right farms, that children can be healthy and can be educated. And so there was all these sustainable development elements that went into empowering people. And ultimately in Kenya, they realized you need to actually have a university in the Masai Mara, because a lot of those communities didn't want their young children, particularly women, to go to far-off cities like Nairobi. So they built an entire college in which a whole generation of Kenyan young people, particularly women and girls, had opportunities that they wouldn't have had before through programs in tourism, engineering, computer science, nursing. The list goes on and on. And so it's really been transformative for an entire region. And you see that in the book. There's a testimonial in my book from the governor of Narok County in Kenya, where We Charity operates, really talking about just the dramatic impact over 20 years on, several generations now of, Kenyan people in the Maasai region, particularly women and girls. And one of the things I'm really proud of in my book is I bring a lot of the stories of those young people to life. I mean, I interviewed, young Kenyans. I interviewed, people in communities. I asked them, what has We Charity meant to you? What has this done for your lives? Is it real? Is it a fiction? Really asked very deliberate questions, because so many questions were being raised in Canada. And what I discovered is the media in the West, Canada in particular, really just ignored all those voices. They didn't want to talk about what work was being done by We Charity. They just wanted to talk about We Charity in the abstract as part of a political process. And I think that's a real shame. And I think readers of my book, I think they will see that there's such a deep treasure we had there in Canada, and the work the Canadians were doing in the world, and that so much of that is lost. And I think that was lost in the public discourse. And those are the stories that I think come alive in my book and that I'm most proud of.
Well, interestingly enough, I remember listening to the interview with on CBC Metro Morning with Matt Galloway, and Mark Kelly said the effect is real. And I think that's the only positive things I heard out of Mark Kelly and the Fifth Estate, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, it's an interesting question. Obviously, I have a whole chapter in the book. One of the closing chapters of the book is called The Fifth Estate. And that's because the CBC's Fifth Estate is, a very reputable program in Canada. It prides itself on investigative journalism. And it had a lot of negative reporting on We Charity, both domestically, but particularly in the international space. I felt like the CBC's Fifth Estate did not really vet a lot of the things it was saying. I thought it didn't do justice, not just to the views of donors who they suggested had been misled, even though most of those donors, all of them, really said they hadn't been misled, but it didn't do justice to the work that was being done on the ground. I dug really deeply into what they had to say about We Charity, partly because I felt like a lot of it was unfair, but on the other hand, to be honest, I was open-minded as a board member. I thought, wow, if they're uncovering things I never knew or I never understood, or if somehow the wool has been pulled over my eyes, well then, I want to get to the bottom of it too. And what I found is that the Fifth Estate offered a very partial and I think in many ways false account of how donors felt their dollars were spent, of how money was actually used in Kenya. And I think, what I do in the book is I really unpack and look hard at what the Fifth Estate had to say, and I think I reveal most of it to just be untrue. But I think the really troubling aspect of the Fifth Estate's work was that they actually went to Kenya, but they didn't really talk to Kenyans in any serious-minded way. There was no Kenyan voice on the show in terms of the beneficiaries of the work of We. And, as you just said, Dean, Mark Kelly paid lip service to that when he went on Matt Galloway's show saying the effect is real. We saw a lot of the work. There are schools there. There are farms there. There is a hospital called Baraka Hospital that's been built by We Charity. There is a college. The impact is real. And then he sort of shifted away from that and said, but, who really cares? Because what we want to talk about is whether, a particular donor got the particular school that they thought they, donated money towards. And I sort of thought, well, aside from I think that being untrue, it's a little bit of a problematic construct because you seem to be focused exclusively on whether Western donors got their money's worth. But I do think that whether they got their money's worth also ought to be assessed through talking to the people on the ground who are the beneficiaries of that work and saying, how are you? Who are you? What has this meant to you? And then telling the world about that too. And they skip that part. And that's what this book is designed to fill in that blank.
The opportunity comes forward for the We Charity and the Kielburgers. The answer, the phone, the Canadian government says we want to put together a program for youth. We're in the middle of COVID crisis. Can you put a bid in for this? So tell us, what went on from that point.
The roots of the We Charity scandal, just what you pointed to, Dean, are just that. The Canada Student Service Grant was an effort by the Canadian government, led by the Liberal Party at the time, to provide some relief to young people who are students to help them defray the cost of university in the first summer of COVID, when there were no job opportunities. Mm-hmm. And the idea was you could work for a nonprofit and you could get grant money from the government to help, fund your education when you probably weren't going to be able to get a summer job. And it was I thought it was a brilliant idea. All the board members of We Charity thought it was a brilliant idea. And We Charity certainly didn't ask to do it. It was, overstretched, and in many ways, I think there were people who didn't really want to do it, but they felt compelled to answer the call when the government asked them to serve because that was their raison d'etre. The charity's real raison d'etre is connecting young people and service opportunities. And it's I think, one of the great shames for me of both this whole saga, but even just my personal, professional life, is to watch how some effort to serve just got totally misinterpreted and manipulated and sort of turned into scandal.
The way that this was naturally portrayed by the opposition parties, both the NDP and the Conservatives, it was a single source contract, but yet the actual civil service had made a determination that no other organization could actually deliver this program in Canada after looking at the landscape. So talk about that, because obviously that was used against the Liberal government to try to bring Trudeau and the Liberal government down.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. In my view, We Charity is collateral damage and became a bit of a political football. What really happened here is the opposition parties in Canada, across the spectrum, both the Conservatives and the NDP, were looking for opportunities to tarnish and bring down the Trudeau government. And the best way to do that, they thought, was to allege some form of cronyism. And so when this Canada Student Service Grant got awarded to We Charity, they were quick to point out that the Trudeau family, including, Justin Trudeau's mother, Justin Trudeau himself and his wife, had relationships with the charity, had, done work for the charity, had appeared at charity events. And they said, wow, this is an obvious opportunity to claim cronyism and suggest that's why this organization got this program, not because they're the right organization to help young people in Canada at that moment in time.
But so too were many Conservatives involved with this organization, premiers of the provinces of Ontario, the former Prime Minister Harper and his wife. I mean, why the double standard?
I think the media in Canada and politicians did a great disservice to Canadians by not pointing out what you just said. And I talk a lot about that in the book. We Charity was politically agnostic. It welcomed members of all political parties. It had deep relationships with the Conservative government. I talk about, former Conservative leader Erin O'Toole's relationship with We Charity, and I point to emails and dialogue with the Kielburgers in which he asks for their assistance, talking about social enterprise, asking for their help in mental health initiatives. And it's really true of NDP party members who had their children participate in We Charity programming across the political spectrum and across Canada. And that they all sort of either ran away or, sort of obfuscated their involvement to suddenly paint this as like a liberal organization. And I think that's really the central underlying myth behind the We Charity scandal is that We Charity and the Kielburgers had this singularly cozy relationship with the Trudeaus and the Liberal Party. And it just wasn't true. And if the media had unpacked that and said, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense, I don't think the We Charity scandal really would have ever gotten off the ground.
The We Charity, the media, the politics, the finance minister resigns, Trudeau escapes the ethics committee scenario. But in the end, the We Charity has to shut down in Canada, sell their real estate, which they've now, from my understanding, put that against the programs in Kenya and other international jurisdictions. What's ahead for the Kielburgers? What's ahead for We Charity? And where do you see the legacy of this?
Yeah, that's really the tragedy of it. In the epilogue of the book, I sometimes basically say, where did everybody end up? And I explain how, the politicians seem to have just done just fine. I mean, everybody, the Trudeau got another, government and won another election. Some of the chief, antagonists of We Charity in the NDP party and the Conservative Party are now, in leadership or, close to leadership positions. And so all the media outlets, they seem to have done really well. The real only collateral damage is We Charity, which closed in Canada. And I think that's, real tragedy and the loss and the collateral consequence of that, what it means for young people in Canada, people around the world. I talk a lot about that. In terms of next steps, I think it's a little uncertain for the Kielburgers. But I think We Charity is continuing to do work in the U.S. and I think it's, there are positive things being done there, not at the same scale, certainly, as they once were. And then the We Charity Foundation is really being set up to continue the work that was being done in Kenya, at least to finish the job, not to start anew, but to finish the job. And all of We Charity's domestic real estate assets were sold to fund that because commitments had been made to all these impoverished communities around the world, and we really couldn't let them down.
Well, that is an unfortunate part about this. But as Lord Louis Mountbatten of Burma and his 5th flotilla, his motto was "keep on." And I think that the Kielburgers, because of the type of people they are, and because of the people that they've surrounded themselves, seem to want to continue on and continue to do good. Today, I want to say thank you for joining me to talk about what we lost. Appreciate all your efforts, and I think it's a great book. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for supporting this important work.